Welcome. I'm here with the Torun Wimpelmann from the Christian Michelsen Institute, and together with Astrid Styrke, the colleague at CMI, you have just gotten a new project from the Norwegian Research Council, and a very interesting title. It's called Gender, Islam and Transnational Legal Ordering in Post-US Afghanistan. So what is this project about?
Well, this is a project that we have developed together with colleagues at the University of Bergen and the Afghanistan Research and Evaluation Unit in Kabul. It's a project that looks into more detail about the relationship between Islamic law, gender, and politics in Afghanistan at the moment, where the international actors are set on leaving or significantly reducing their presence.
Could you say a little bit more about what you actually look at?
So we want to look at three things, really. We want to look into the landscape of scholarly authority on Islamic law in the country. Of course, claims about what Islamic law says has been extremely politicized in Afghanistan, as in many other countries. But we want to understand, who are the most important legal scholars, what are their statements, positions, and reasoning around women's rights, both Shia and Sunni, and to what extent are there consensus, and what issues are there consensus, and what issues are more disputed, and where are these people situated, both in terms of broader intellectual thoughts across the Muslim world and also politically. So that's this particular part of the project is going to be done by a PhD student at the University of Bergen, where they have a large project on current understanding and practices of Islamic law. So that's one part. The second part is looking at how and with what results the Afghan women's movement are using Islamic law to promote women's rights, because this has been it's become like almost a mantra in the last 15 years to say that, if you want to promote Afghan women's rights, you have to anchor your arguments in Islamic law. Mm-hmm. And there's also been a lot of aid projects on this, financing kind of awareness raising and so on about women's rights in Islam. But of course, there are many divergent views of exactly what Islam says about women. So we want to look into the experience of this, and what has been the kind of achievements of using this strategy, and what arguments are being used, which issues have been most controversial, and what is the idea within the Afghan women's movement about anchoring your strategy and arguments in Sharia. Is this something that everyone agrees on? Are there different strategies and so on? And then the third component of the project is looking at legal practices. There has been a lot of research, including my own, on the politics of law reform. But we don't know so much about legal practices. And in Afghanistan, because there's been so many different political regimes and so much conflict over the place of Sharia within the legal framework, we have different generations of judges. Some of them might not be referring primarily to codified law and instead applying their knowledge of Islamic law. Others are trained in codified law and use those laws more fully. So we don't actually, and because most of the research has been on legal reform, and we don't really know what's going on in the courts that much. So we want to understand, what is the practice on things that Sharia says a lot about, like divorce, child custody. What does the judges actually do, and with what consequences for women's rights?
Super interesting. This is a project that you were awarded from Norglobal, which is sort of linked to, it's a more applied research project, which means that you got it because you've argued really well for why this is important. So can you say something about why is this knowledge that is so needed for?
Well, there are many different ways. I mean, the primary reason why we think it's important is because it is really under-researched in Afghanistan. I mean, despite all the political attention to women's rights in the last 2 decades, there are so many things that it's not really been explored systematically in scholarly research, such as, for instance, what happens in the courts. You know, because we know that in the last 20 years, Afghan women are going to the courts in a much larger numbers than ever before. But we don't know what happened once they're there, which is, you know, not just important for scholars, but also for activism. You know, to what extent are women getting the rights that they are granted in law, and what are the kind of obstacles, for instance, in achieving those, and where does the law itself needs to reform? So that's one thing. On the overall kind of landscape of Islamic scholarly authority, we also know very little, because most of the research has been focused on politics, conflict, you know, the war, and there's very little kind of in-depth exploration of Islamic discourses, where people get their influences from different countries like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, or Turkey, or wherever it might be. And also the women's activists, the women's movement, very little kind of independent research. A lot of it is the material that you get is often project evaluations, which, you know, although they give a lot of important information, might not be entirely independent. And I think it's very, you know, a lot of research has been done in the Iranian women's movement and the Pakistani movement. So it's interesting to put the Afghan women's movement into perspective. And I guess we got awarded this project, perhaps primary reasons because we argued on relevance, and there was a particular call in this round for projects that are relevant to the peace processes in Asia, where Norway is extensively involved, and where there are already Norwegian research that capacity needs to be maintained. And of course, in Afghanistan, Norway is now very involved, has been involved in the peace process since at least 2007. And Norway was recently given their overall responsibility for Afghanistan in the Security Council. So I guess in that sense also. And of course, you know, it's not just Norway having a stake in the peace process. Of course, Afghans are the main stakeholders. And the peace process, most people believe that one of the core issues will be the role of Islamic law in the constitution. The Taliban certainly will want to elevate Sharia in the legal framework, and a lot of people are very worried about what this will mean for women's rights. But in that context, it's very important to have knowledge about what is the state of women's rights today in practice, and you know, what would any formal changes, what impact would that have on actual women's lives?
Wow, we're looking forward to hearing more from this. Just a small question at the end. In the title, you talk about transnational legal orderings. What do you mean by transnational legal orderings?
It refers to the fact that Afghanistan is an extremely globalized country. Everything, you know, the legal framework is very influenced from Turkey and Egypt. And of course, it has the intellectual traditions are it's a lot of exchange with Pakistan and other countries. And then on the other level, of course, whatever has happened in Afghanistan in the last 20 years has been shaped in many ways by the international presence. So transnational legal orderings, it kind of refers to the fact that there are a lot of different influences from different settings. You cannot understand what's going on in Afghanistan as something that is just originated within the country's border.
Thank you, and good luck to you and your Afghan your colleagues and colleagues at the University of Bergen and Astrid Sørke.
Thank you.